So what bones are you seeing on the screen right now? That's the top of what bone?
Long bone.
It is a long bone. It is the femur, right? It's the longest, largest bone in your body. And I've got a human femur here in my hands. And what you'll see is that only the outside of the bone is hard. And when we were looking under the microscope at bone, we were only looking at the outside edge of the bone. That's where you find the osteons and the canaliculi and all the things that we've looked at on the histology. On the inside of the bone, what you discover is that there's a hollow cavity, and there's a totally different kind of bone called spongy bone on the inside. Okay, and this spongy bone is just like a really nice loofah sponge, right? You can touch it, feel it, and you can imagine how well that would take off the rough spots on your heel, right? It'd be a great thing for the shower, right? I mean, it's really, really, I don't know how old this particular femur is, but the inside, you can definitely feel it and imagine it would be a beautiful back scratcher or something like that. Okay. In fact, this bone comes with a handle, right? You're welcome to touch it if you want to, but it'll be over there for display. But it comes with a handle, right? So it'll be a great thing for the shower. If you have a source of human femurs, we could go on Shark Tank together, perhaps, and make some money. I don't know. Maybe they'd be intrigued. We could sell them on QVC or something.
Shake it up a little
right? Isn't that great, though? Wouldn't that be great for those rough spots? Okay. So if we take a look, right, this is the top half of the femur. And on the picture, what you're realizing on the screen is that just the outside edge is called the compact bone. That's what we saw under the microscope. Everything on the inside is another kind of bone. We won't be looking at it under the microscope. Just know about it. It's called spongy bone. And the arrangement of the spongy bone is referred to as the trabeculae. So you'll see this word trabeculae of spongy bone. It's this kind of matrixy, kind of random, lots of little spaces in it. And that's how we describe that. Now, this image is kind of a reflection of the model that we have, the birthday cake model that we have floating around. We have a couple of these. There's definitely one of these over in the resource room. And this model almost always shows up on the lab practical exam. So make sure you can identify those 6 things that we talked about last week. And in fact, I'm going to add one to our list today. Last week, there were 6 things you had to know. We went over it in the quiz. I went over it before we even had the quiz. We're looking at a big chunk of bone, right? Big old round bone. And we're seeing just the outside edge here. This is the compact bone. In the center of the bone, this would all be made of spongy bone. Okay? And again, we talked about the osteons, and the osteons are these columns that are running the entire length of the long bone. Right? So all the way down the long bone, you've got these long column structures called osteons. The structure that we did not have last week, actually, it was on your list. It was on that slide last week at the very bottom, and it said Volkmann's canals. Okay, I told you not to worry about it. Today we're going to worry about it because we can see the Volkmann's canals on this 3-dimensional model. Watch with me. Do you see how this is a central canal? We see the osteon here. That's the central canal. And this is the central canal. You'll also notice, though, that there are some perpendicular canals that are running from central to central canal. These perpendicular canals, and that's a name, that's an okay name, but they were also named after a guy named Volkmann's. Volkmann. And it was on last week's, and you'll see it in the lab things today. Volkmann's canals. You cannot see those Volkmann canals on histology, right? Which is why they weren't part of your learning for last week. But you can and do see them on the model. They're simply the perpendicular canals through which blood flows. So blood is an extremely vascular tissue. And the picture on the screen, I think, does an even better job. Because as you look in these central canals, what do you see? Not only do you see blood vessels, but I also see yellow. Nerves. Right? So in those central canals, there are nerves and blood vessels. So if you break a bone, it's painful and it's a bloody mess. Right? There's a lot of blood traveling through your bones. You can see on the right-hand side of this image where you're gone past the compact bone and you're beginning to get into the spongy bone. Right? And you see that trabeculae right through here. The outside layer of the bone is called the periosteum. You'll see this in a moment again. Periosteum. Okay? And where the spongy bone and the compact bone, that interface, is called the endosteum. Endosteum. And you'll see that in a moment on another picture. So we have the periosteum around the bone. We have the endosteum lining the inside of the compact bone. Here's the histology. Again, we've already gone over this with the quiz, but you can clearly see, we change colors, you can clearly see the big cylindrical osteon structure. You can see the central canal where there's blood vessels and nerves traveling through that. And I think everyone sees that tree trunk idea. There are layers here. In each of those layers is a lamella. And what we see in that circular arrangement are these spaces, right? My pen's too thick. But these spaces are, just like in the cartilage, those are lacunae. And in those lacunae we have osteocytes, bone cells. Now those are living cells, right? They need oxygen, they need nutrients, they need to communicate, they need access to that blood supply that's going through the central canal for their oxygen and their nutrients. So they get it through little canaliculi, which are basically little cracks, little canals that are traveling from one lacuna to the next. And those nutrients are moving via diffusion, right, from higher concentration to lower concentration. Again, one of the reasons why we had to go through that. You cannot appreciate on this a Volkmann's canal, right, only on the three-dimensional model. So that's why on the quiz list for next week it says 7 bone microanatomy structures. Last week it was 6. This week add the Volkmann's canals. So you should know this story very, very well. Also up on the list for next week's quiz, it says long bone anatomy, number 4. And this slide represents that long bone anatomy. So the things I'm going over here, you'll also get to review in your pre-labs. So as I look at this bone, right, on the right, it's exactly like I have in my hand, the human femur cut open. And the parts of the bone that we need to know are as follows. The shaft of the bone is called the diaphysis. Diaphysis. Physis means growth. Okay? So this physis term is the same as growth. You're going to see it a couple of times. So diaphysis, diaphysis, tells us that the bone is going to grow bigger in dia, across, right? We know that bones get bigger in diameter as we get older. No issue there. Right? Look at a 2-year-old, a 10-year-old, you know the bones get bigger around. Diaphysis, they grow bigger in diameter. At the two ends of the bone, we have 2 structures that on this slide are called the same exact thing. Well, that's not a good idea. So think about anatomical position. The femur is sitting in your leg. So what would be a better name to describe the top epiphysis? Did I hear proximal? Right? And the bottom epiphysis would be the distal. And again, we're going to use proximal and distal because we're on the leg or the arm. We're on these long bone type things. Like all of your long bones are found in your arms or legs. They're all part of your appendicular skeleton. There's one more feature that I notice here. On the bottom, there is a solid line. It's called the epiphyseal line. That line is evidence to you that this bone has reached its adult height. It may not be quite that obvious when you look at it, but I can still see on this bone, you still see an area that looks like a line. That epiphyseal line tells me that this bone is no longer going to grow longer. That's this epiphysis, right? Why would they call it epiphysis? We know epi means what? On or upon. So the epiphysis is, quote, on the growth. On your long bones grow longer from their ends. In a younger person, this would not be a solid line. It would instead be what we would call an epiphyseal plate, or what you would more commonly call the growth plate. Your bones are first cartilage, and then as they elongate, they become bone. So there would be an area there, and we'll discuss this more clearly in lecture by far, but there'll be an area there where the bone is still lengthening from a cartilage precursor and then becoming bone as it gets longer. So this bone, that epiphyseal plate has fused, it has closed, it is now just a line. If I took an x-ray of my 16-year-old son, right, likely he still has, and my 12-year-old and my 7-year-old, they're going to have definitely epiphyseal plates, growth plates, where they have not fused. My 16-year-old's hoping his have not fused, right? He's only 6'2", he's only about 250, he's on the top list for a lot of recruiting for D1 schools, but he's been told he needs another inch and 30 more pounds. Well, he's a Macauley. The pounds aren't a problem. But the whole, I can't change his height, right? So we're hoping that he's not completely grown. So if he were to hurt himself, right, I would love to go see an x-ray of his wrist right now or see his femur. And if it still has a gap there, we may have a scholarship, a bigger scholarship in our future. If it's closed, D2's not bad, right? We'll get it into a D2 school. So that's what we see for the dried up bone. Now, what if I have on this side a freshly opened bone? Okay, and I have one of those over here for you to show you. And what you're going to see, this is just a fresh specimen from the deli. I need a probe. Let me find a probe. So what you see in this fresh specimen, and some old broken up pencil will do. On the inside is basically fat. So that yellow bone marrow, when you look inside of a bone, what you get is Crisco, right? So the inside bone, that marrow cavity, is filled with this yellow bone marrow. It's basically fat. It's what the dog's excited about when you throw them a bone. They want to get to that gravy. And it's also why Grandma throws a bone in the soup, right? That fat permeates out and gives that soup a better flavor. So that fat, you can see it, and I'll have this over here for you on the side, but that whole marrow cavity in a fresh bone is filled with lovely fat. Okay? We call that the yellow bone marrow. This will be true of all of your long bones, just like this. Okay? Isn't that lovely? Crisco. Okay? Now we'll throw that pen away. So in this picture, you see the yellow, right? The yellow bone marrow that is filling up that marrow cavity, this area in the center. I mentioned to you earlier the periosteum. The periosteum is that layer that is around the outside of a freshly secured bone. It's gone in this old dried up femur, right? You don't see it on the old dried up bone, but you would on a fresh bone. And this slide also shows you the endosteum. Endosteum, it's the border between the compact bone and the internal spongy bone. So on the model, this gray interface represents the endosteum, that layer here, right? The interface between the compact bone and the spongy bone. That's the endosteum, and then the periosteum around the outside of the bone. In this bone, the last couple of things I want to point out is you see some blood vessels coming in and out of the bone. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't think of bones as having blood vessels going in and out of them. I think of bones as being these sticks that hold me together and give me structure. But we've already said that there's living cells inside this bone. They have to get blood and oxygen somehow. And we know that inside your bones, what process is happening? Yeah, you got blood production. So on the board, hematopoiesis. You'll also see it called hemopoiesis. Same word, hemo or hemato, blood. So you have this process of hemo or hematopoiesis, all one word, occurring. That is occurring wherever there is red bone marrow. And I see in this adult bone, and I know it's adult bone because I see an epiphyseal line, I only see red bone marrow happening up at the proximal end. As a child, there is more red bone marrow in the body, partly because the bones are smaller, and there's a big ramping up of blood production in a younger person. So in a younger person, the femur would be largely red bone marrow. As we get older, much of that red bone marrow is replaced by fat, by yellow bone marrow. So in most of our femurs, we've got yellow bone marrow, except the proximal end is still where hemopoiesis occurs. I'll mention it again in lab or in lecture, but you still have active hemopoiesis occurring in your adult body. at the top of your femur, also at the proximal top of your humerus. There is still blood production going on in your frontal bone. You got blood being made in your forehead, kind of cool. You've got blood being made in your ribs and some in your vertebra. Okay, so kind of an awkward, kind of a hodgepodge of places, but that's where you still have active blood production being produced. So how does that blood get out of the bones? Right? It has to have a way in and out. So there are definitely, if you look at this old bone here, see this little, looks like a little crack, a little defect in the bone. Here's another one on that picture. And if you look at the bone, you'll see these little, seemingly little divots. Okay? In living bone, there would be a nutrient foramen. Nutrient, blood supply. Foramen is a word we'll see a lot of today. Foramen means an opening. Foramen. Now, multiple foramen, one foramen, two foramina. One foramen, two foramina. So that's our plural. It's not foramens, right? One foramen, two foramina. Lastly, on this picture, at the ends of the bones, at the epiphyses, plural, I am seeing some cartilage. If you look at just the very, very top, right along here, I see some cartilage, and right along the distal end. That's called articulating or articular cartilage. That is specifically hyaline cartilage, right? That's that glassy white cartilage we've seen. And it's only going to be found in the bones where bones touch each other, where they articulate. And that should be smooth, really, really smooth. And as it breaks down with age or inflammation, right, that's arthritis. So when that starts to break down, now we've already said that cartilage is avascular. When you start breaking down that adult cartilage, it doesn't regenerate. It doesn't replace itself, which is why arthritis and ligament and meniscus issues in the knee and things like that are so devastating because the body doesn't have a way of repairing itself on the cartilage. Not much repair going on at all. So lots of details here about long bone, and that's number 4 on your quiz for next week. And you'll get a chance to practice this again. Okay, what did I say about red bone marrow? It's where what happens? Hemo or hematopoiesis. And as we get older, more and more of our bone marrow is replaced by yellow bone marrow, which is basically just fat. Okay. You're tired of talking about things you can't see. Let's finally talk about things you can see. Human skeleton. 206 bones, on average. Some people have one more or one less. Usually those changes are in the coccyx, in the tailbone. There's 2 or 3, 4 little bones that fuse together to make the coccyx. So when people say they only have 205 bones or they have 207 bones, usually that little slight variation is in the coccyx. Okay, everything else is pretty much the same. In the room we have 4 skeletons. One's real, 3 are fake ones, but even if you look at them, they're all slightly different. Yes, you can tell a femur is a femur and a humerus is a humerus, but you'll see some variation on the theme, especially when you look at their rib cage and their sternum. You'll see quite a bit of variation. So when you look at a picture in an anatomy lab book, it's really the average, ideal representation, but it's not necessarily what any one of us looks like, right, if we just had our skeleton looking at us. We've talked about the axial versus the appendicular regions before. Same thing is true. Some books will separate studying the bones into the axial skeleton and then into the appendicular skeleton. The appendicular are the arms and legs. And what else? What attaches the arms and legs? So that means that the clavicle and the scapula, the 2 bones that hold onto the arm, are also part of the appendicular skeleton. And the hip bone is also part of the appendicular skeleton that holds the leg on. Okay, so we'll come back to that as we go through this. Here's a table. I know it's a little bit blurry. These are the bones of the axial skeleton. There happen to be 80 bones. And these 80 bones are spread out in your skull and your facial bones. They are your ribs, they're your vertebra, your breastbone. Let's go through this. There won't be any points for breastbone, shoulder blade, kneecap, right? Those words are no longer going to give you any points. So we got to make sure we know the anatomical names for the bones. I know that somewhere in elementary, middle school, and high school, probably one of each, you learned the major bones of the body. But when you pointed to the skull, you just said skull, right? That's what most of us had. If you took an anatomy class in high school, you learned more of it, but many of you just know skull. So the area that you're probably the weakest is going to be in the bones of the face and the bones of the skull. Okay? Now, you'll see here there's a number in parentheses. After frontal, it says there's only one. If there's only one, it's in the very center of the body. If instead there's two of them, left and right, and you got a pair of them. So some bones are just one, like the frontal bone and the occipital bone. Other bones are paired, like the parietal bones and the temporal bones. There's also a sphenoid and an ethmoid. We'll be naming all those today. There's a bunch of bones that make up your face. Again, some of them are left and right pairs, like the zygomatic bones, but some of them there's only one. It's right in the center, called the vomer. There are some bones in your ear. They're the smallest bones in your body. They're called the ossicles. We're going to skip those 6 bones for now and deal with them when we get to the ear in a few weeks. So we won't worry about those 6 bones. So now we're only down to 200. Okay. There is one hyoid bone in the throat area. We'll see that. And then you've got some vertebra, one sacrum, one coccyx, one sternum, and a bag full of ribs. Now, it says up here 24 ribs. Is that for men or for women? Is there a difference in the rib count for men and women? Yes, no, maybe. I learned that God took a rib from Adam and made Eve. But what Genesis doesn't tell us is that he put it back. Okay? So men and women have the same number of ribs. Okay? They both have 12 pairs. But I've had a couple students in the past who want to get up on the table and start screaming at me. Nope. Their Sunday school teacher told them that Adam had one less rib. Sunday school teacher didn't read, that God put it back in. Okay? So all people have 24 ribs. I'm going to spend most of my time here going through the vertebra, because this is an area where students are usually very unfamiliar, and if I don't go through this carefully, then there'll be more misconceptions. So I'm going to be going through this model here. It looks like the picture you have up on the screen. If you've been to a chiropractor or a doctor, you've seen a model like this. And this is going to show us our 24 vertebra. The 24 vertebra are broken up into 3 regions. In the neck region, there's the cervical region. There are 7 cervical vertebra. They're numbered C1 through C7. Very easy. Then there are 12 thoracic vertebra. They would be making up your thorax, making up your rib cage. They would have ribs attached to them. And there are 12 of those thoracic vertebra, right? 2 ribs each, right? So there's 24 ribs. And then the lower 5, the bottom 5 are the lumbar vertebra. And there are 5 of those, the lower back region. After that, there's the sacrum, and then after that, there's the coccyx. They are not considered vertebra. So 7, 12, 5. One cute little way is breakfast at 7, lunch at 12, dinner at 5. Right? I don't live in that world, but it may help you remember the breakdown of the vertebra. On this model, what you're seeing at the very top, this is the back of the skull. This is the occipital lobe, occipital bone. Okay? Back of the skull. Okay, and I'm going to go through this, and I want you to make this slide into a table. I want you to just take 2 lines and do this. Okay, and we're going to make 3 columns out of this. And I've already told you the 3 types of vertebra. Right, we had the cervical, thoracic, and lumbar. Right, we had the cervical, the thoracic, and the lumbar. And how would you describe their locations? Cervical, we know that word means neck, absolutely. Thoracic, part of your thorax, part of your thoracic cavity, and that would have what? All of your rib cage, right? So your ribs are attached to your thoracics. And then lumbar, lower back, right? Lower back. And then how many were there of each? 7, 12, 5, going across. Right, 7, 12, 5. In a moment, I'll give you a miscellaneous fact about each of these that you can plug in there. But hold on. So let's take a look. I need you to go to the zoo with me, take a little field trip. And while we were at the zoo, we saw a critter that looked a lot like this bone face. Kind of gives us face of an animal. What animal do you see when you take a look at these vertebrae? I'm hearing giraffes. I like it. You kind of see the giraffe's face? You see that? Kind of imagine it? So this is what your thoracic vertebra look like. Let's go ahead and prove it to yourself. Open up your box and take out the bunch of vertebrae. They're all attached by a string. And then if you need to, move your box off your table up to another counter or off to another table just to get it out of your way. I want your table to be able to interact with this set of bones. No, just the vertebra for now. Just the vertebra now. You take the whole box and just put it off the back table or up on the counter. Move it out of the way for now. Be a chiropractor. Try to put those vertebrae in some reasonable, comfortable position. What you would imagine them to be. And look right in the center of all of those, and those are your thoracic vertebra, and convince yourself they do sort of have that giraffe silhouette to them. All right, everyone look at the middle ones, and convince yourself that in isolation they do have that giraffe look to them. Everyone see that? Now, I've got a thoracic vertebra in my hand, and look what I'm going to do. I'm going to bring it up and put it on the screen. And do you see that the silhouette, right, is exactly like what I'm showing here? Okay, so that's the orientation. You're looking down. This is a superior view. So you're looking down on a thoracic vertebra. There are some parts here that you need to be familiar with. Let's go through some of these. Number one, the big opening in the center. That is the vertebral foramen, right? The opening in the vertebra. Why do we have vertebral foramina? Yeah, the spinal cord is passing right down through that opening. Right now the string is passing down that in your models to hold everything together. So we need to know the vertebral foramen. There's also a rather large solid region called the body of the vertebra. Now there's something very different about my model up here and what you have in front of you. My model up here on the rack, there is a big chunk of cartilage in between the bodies, in between the vertebra. Those are the discs, okay, the intervertebral discs, the disc between the vertebra. That's made of cartilage. It's a different kind of cartilage called fibrocartilage. It's a very weight-bearing, tough, fibrous fibrocartilage. And this is the same kind of cartilage one finds in their knee. And we'll talk about that more next week. So we have the body. Then, the part that is sticking out, the part that you can palpate down along your back, right? This sticking out is the spinous process. Now, in bone world and in anatomy, a process is anything that sticks out. So, the spinous process, and that is going to be what we can feel along our back. The vertebra, most of them also have transverse processes, left and right. These processes off to the side. Left and right transverse processes. What do you see at the very end of these transverse processes? Looks like a little indentation and some white, doesn't it? What would articulate? What would attach there? These are your thoracic vertebra, so ribs, right? So you would have your ribs attaching to those thoracic vertebra, those transverse processes coming around. Again, you're always going to find cartilage where two bones come together. Okay. Last thing I want you to realize on these, there is a superior articulating or articular process. If we go back to the zoo and you're looking at the giraffe, what are these things pointing up on the giraffe? These are the horns, right? And then these are the ears. So the transverse processes are, quote, the ears of the giraffe. And these horns, superior, articulating, where two bones are going to touch, process. Right? Something is sticking up. Now, where are the vertebrae actually touching? Remember that the vertebra, the two giraffes, are separated by a chunk of cartilage. So their bodies aren't touching. What is touching, however, is this superior articulating process. And it will be touching the inferior articulating process of the giraffe above, of the vertebra above. Now that process happens to have a very flat surface on it. And that flat surface is called a facet, or you'll hear facet. Ladies, what are facets? You're fascinated with them. You make the guys pay a lot of money for them. You went to Jared. On a diamond, multifaceted diamond. The more flat sides there are on a diamond. So what's a facet? A flat surface. Right? So if you look at these, you'll see that the superior articulating process is flat. So you'll also see it called the superior articulating facet. And it's going to articulate with, watch me, turn the giraffe upside down, look underneath his cheekbones, and right there's also a flat surface. That would be the inferior articulating facet. Okay. So those are the structures you need to know on the vertebra. You can cross off the arch, the lamina, and the pedicle. We won't be describing those this semester. Let's go back to the zoo. And this time, we've gone to a different part of the zoo. Now what animal are we going to see? This is not a giraffe.
It's a rhino.
Yeah, rhino's okay. Moose, rhino, either one's fine. How would you describe the way that a moose or a rhino would move or run? Their movement might be described as being lumbering. Aha. Okay, so the lumbar vertebra have this moose or rhino look to them. Prove it to yourself. Look at the bottom 4 or so vertebra, the bottom 5 are lumbar, and convince yourself they have that moose-like silhouette. Okay? Yes, you see it? Now, if you look around T12, what would T12 be? The most inferior of the thoracics. It kind of looks like the giraffe and the moose got out of their pens and made a funny-looking baby. Okay? It's kind of a morphing of giraffes and mooses, if that's the right word. So I would only ask you to identify a clearly identifiable moose or a clearly identifiable giraffe. But you do need to recognize these vertebrae in isolation. Lastly, look at this picture. We haven't talked about these yet. This is a cervical vertebra, as it says. What's unique or different about this vertebra? It has something extra. Yeah, it has 2 additional openings. Those are on rather short transverse processes. There's an opening, so we call those the transverse processes. They're only on the 7 cervical vertebrae. Look at this model and tell me why. Look at the model up here. Why do the cervical vertebra have the extra foramina? You see those blood vessels? See these blood vessels going up through the neck? And they're traveling right through that series of openings. I want to convince you that every hole, bump, bruise, process on a bone is there for a reason. It's there to allow something to pass through. It's there for something to attach to it, like a ligament or a tendon. Right? So we're going to see that all these different parts of a vertebra or part of a bone has a purpose. And we're going to describe some of those. So you see that blood vessel here traveling through the model, right? And so you can see that that blood vessel traveling through the neck, through the cervical region, is well protected because of those transverse process foramina. Okay. So back to your table with the 3 columns. Under miscellaneous, what would you put for cervical? What's our unique feature? The transverse foramina, right? And then for the thoracic, our unique feature was that they look like giraffes, right? And the lumbar look like a moose or a rhino. Whatever you see is fine. At your table or in your box, there should have been 4 blunt end probes. These probes are what you should be using to point to our models. From this point on, right, you should find these things kind of laying all over the place, If you don't have one, let me know, but there should be 4 at every table. Maybe they got dropped into your box. But rather than pointing to our models with highlighters, pens, and markers, and your snotty fingers, we're going to be using these probes. Now, here's why. It's not so obvious today, but next week when we're starting to use our muscle models, you're going to notice that they're all hand-painted by a very fine paint. And if we have to go through the lab and twice a semester wipe them down with antiseptic, that paint gets dimmer and dimmer and dimmer. So to minimize the wear and tear on our models, we're going to insist that you use the blunt end probes. You'll find them in the study room. You'll find them scattered around the room. So with your blunt end probe, everyone at your table, let's do Simon Says, point to the body and confirm with your group that you're pointing to a body of a vertebra. And if there's any uncertainty, let me know. You're pointing to the body of a vertebra. Okay, now we're all going to point to a spinous process. The spinous process is on what part of the vertebra, if you were to use a directional term? Dorsal or posterior? It's on the back, right? It's on the back of the body, right? It's the most posterior portion of the vertebra. How about the transverse process? All right, those are the wings, if you will, the side processes. I think we've already done this one, but let's do it again. The superior and inferior articulating facets. Go to your thoracic, go to the middle vertebra, they're easier to see there, and look for, quote, the horns of the giraffe and how they're going to articulate with the cheekbone underneath the giraffe above. Does everyone see the inferiors? Any doubt at all? Let me know. Point now to the vertebral foramen. The vertebral foramen, that's the opening through which the string is passing, isn't it? Every vertebra has an opening. Transverse foramen. You better be looking at only the 7 cervical vertebra, right, to find the transverse foramen. And there's one more, and I have not yet introduced it. It's the intervertebral foramen. Look on my model. Inter means between. On this model, you see all these yellow nerves popping out from the spinal cord, and they're coming out between the vertebrae. Look at it from the side. See how all the nerves are coming out of an opening, and that opening is where the 2 vertebrae kind of stack together. So with the vertebrae on their side, remember to separate the bodies a little bit. Separate because you have the disc, and you can see that there's an opening, right, on the side, right? So that opening, right, that opening will be for the passage of the spinal nerves. You've got to be looking at 2 of them stacked. So if we look right here, imagine those 2 are separated, that opening right there. Okay. Everybody see that okay? Absolutely, right? So you can see it. Everybody see that one okay? You guys can see it nicely? Boom, 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 boom. Good. Anyone have any doubt about the intervertebral foramen? You have to have 2 vertebrae to see it, right? They have to be stacked, and to see those, you have to be able to see it. Very good. So that story is number 3 up on the board, vertebral anatomy. Know these 6 or so structures on the different vertebra and be able to recognize a thoracic versus a lumbar versus a cervical vertebra. How are we doing? Okay. That's all part of the axial skeleton, as is the face. Each group has a colored skull. We're going to only use colored skulls this semester in learning about the bones of the face and the skull. However, do not memorize the colors, because there are 2 sets of these. So all of you right now have a mustard yellow frontal bone, but we also have some bones that have a green frontal bone. So do not memorize colors, right? Just know their direction and their relationship to all the other bones. Our primary goal this week is to learn the bones. We'll be dealing with the other things later. So for example, on this image, the bones are in bold. Right? On this PowerPoint, the bones are in bold, and things like arches and margins and foramens and fissures, those things are not bolded, and those are not our focus today. So our focus is on the bones, and I'll go through that list with you. As you're looking at these skulls, some bones are 1, right? They're only 1 of them. They're right in the very center of the skull, and others are paired left and right. So you'll be walking through the story, naming the bones of the skull. You'll also be looking through the bones of the appendicular skeleton. 126 bones, that sounds really kind of scary, but remember we have 2 of everything, right? There's 2 arms and 2 legs. So cut this number in half immediately, and you're only down to 60-some bones. And then 56 of these bones are all called a phalanx. So you've got 3 little bones in every finger, you've got 2 bones in your thumb, that's 14 in each hand, that's 28 in your hands, and there's 28 more in your toes. So the number is not so bad. And these are the ones that I suspect you are more familiar with. So we all have, hopefully, 2 clavicles, 2 scapula, 2 humeruses, 2 radiuses, 2 ulnas. We're only going to call the wrist bones the carpals. We're not going to learn the individual names this semester. We're just going to call them the carpals collectively. There are 10 metacarpals. These are the bones, the long bones going through the palm of your hand, 5 on each hand. And then again, 14 phalanges in each hand, 28. And they're very easily named. Distal, middle, and proximal. And then we number the digits. The thumb is Roman numeral number 1. The pinky is Roman numeral number 5. And that is true for the feet as well. The big toe is number 1. The pinky toe is number 5. So we just kind of use numbers, and we say the phalanx of the middle phalanx, the distal phalanx, the proximal phalanx of a particular digit on the left or right side. Okay, so they all have the same name. It's really quite easy. Then your hip bone is more properly called the ossa coxae, and we'll talk about that. We have a couple femurs, a couple patellas, a couple tibias, a couple fibulas. There are 7 bones in each of your ankles. We're only going to learn 2 of them. You will need to know the calcaneus and the talus. The calcaneus, the first 2, are on the list. And I'll go through this with you on another list. Then finally, there are the 10 long bones of the foot, the metatarsals, and again, a whole bunch of little tiny bones called the phalanges. So that is what you need to know, okay, when it comes to the bones. Now let's turn back in your Amerman book and let me walk you through this for a couple moments about what you need to be looking at. Starting on page 141. Starting on page 141. Those are the orangey pages. And you won't really be doing much with the Unit 7. This is kind of review and some read-through materials. So 141, histology. We know what that looks like. We've been through it. Turn over the page and you see basically that birthday cake model. And on the next page, it says compact bone structures, spongy bone structures. There's a list of about 12 or so things over there. Most of those things are the things we've talked about. So you should be able to find those on the model. We're not going to be pulling out the microscopes today, so we don't have to draw anything on page 143. Turn over to 144. There is a little experiment that we've done over here. Has anyone ever taken a bone and soaked it in acid for the weekend? Anybody ever done this? Middle school, elementary school somewhere? Well, we did it. Okay, I'm going to show you what happens. And I think a bone is like being a superhighway. When you're driving along and there's a new highway being made and you're in that lane and they're constructing it over on the side, what do you see as they're making the road? What are they laying down to make that superhighway? You might see some steel rods. You ever seen the steel rods, right? Steel rebar. And then there's also the concrete or the cement. I always forget which one's which. So in the bone, you've got a lot of collagen. Collagen is that protein that gives tissues a lot of strength. So a lot of collagen in bone. We would say that's the organic component, right? The protein component is the collagen. And then the calcium and the phosphate, that's the mineral component of the bone. That's like the concrete. Together, they're stronger than they would be by themselves. So we took a bone and we baked it. About 450 degrees. Actually, I didn't. Jennifer did. But even got a little charred. This bone would now be what? More brittle, right? A bone that's been cooked for a long time is going to be more brittle. When this bone gets heated, what's being destroyed? The collagen or the calcium phosphate? we know that proteins get denatured at high temperatures, right? So the proteins got destroyed. Now the bone still has some strength, but it is more brittle because now you've lost that strength of the collagen, but you still have the calcium phosphate mineral component. Now the bone that was put instead into acid for the weekend. Right? Very, very flexible. What did the acid destroy? The calcium and the phosphate. This is why our statues in Athens, Greece, are disintegrating from the acid rain, right? We know that acid rain eats away at statues and at, limestone type things. This is why people are all upset about, well, soda ruined your teeth. It can, not only because of the sugar, but soda is quite acidic. And if you sit there and, sit there and wash soda in your mouth all day, it can, over time, erode your enamel because the enamel is also calcium phosphate mineral. And so you can damage your teeth through excessive acid production or acid exposure. And your bones as well. But when I drink Coke, though that acid's not sitting up against my bones, right? But it is against my teeth for a little while. So yeah, there is a concern about acid erosion in teeth and bones. So I just wanted to show this to you. You can read through this little experiment, but I want you to appreciate that bone is both a mineral, calcium phosphate, that can be destroyed in acid, and it is collagen, a protein that can be destroyed by heat, and together they make bone incredibly strong. Okay, so they work together. Continuing on, you've got a little discussion about shapes of bones. The only bone shape I've described to you today are long bones, right, like the femur. But even your little phalanx, your little phalanges in your finger are considered long bones. They have the same basic architecture. So the diaphysis, the epiphysis, all of that is the same even in the little fingers of your forefinger. So going on, I'll talk about flat bones and irregular bones more completely in lecture. Moving on, now you just have your check your understanding, check your recall, some practice over this material. Keep on going and you'll get over to the blue pages of Unit 8. And as you continue past all that stuff that was some of it turned in for your pre-lab, you're going to come to some beautiful colored skulls, right? Beautiful skulls. Now the skulls are viewed from like 4 or 5 different angles. On top you have a colored model. Down below you have the real skull labeled in the same way. Keep turning, keep turning. Beautiful pictures of skulls, different views. Then you start getting into pictures of your vertebra, right? Things we've already been talking about today. And then stop, keep going past the vertebra. You'll see the sacrum and the coccyx. Then you get into the rib cage. You'll see the scapula. Then you'll see some of the long bones. And I think I missed a page. I need you to go back. My bad. I missed a page. Right before this. Go to 167. Okay? I missed it. 167. Okay, after all the skull and facial bones. On 167, and mark with me as I go through this list. What I'm going to have you circle right now are the bones. These are the things that you need to know by next week as we break this down. So in here, you definitely want to know, number 3, the frontal bone. So circle the frontal bone or highlight it or something. And then number 4, parietal. Next column, 1 temporal, 2 occipital. Next column, sphenoid, and 2 ethmoid. You see what we're doing, right? These are the bones. The things underneath it, some of them we'll learn later, but for this week your focus is on name the bone. Under group D down below, mandible, 1, maxilla, 2. Next one, palatine. Number 2, zygomatic bone, but not the arch. 3, lacrimal bone, but not the fossa. Definitely 4, the nasal, 5, vomer, 6, inferior nasal concha. And that's it. Okay, that's it for that list for now. Okay, now keep turning the pages and you see the beautiful pictures of the long bones and of the vertebra and everything else. And now you're going to land over on page 181, I believe. We'll do the same thing over here. On 181, under group A, now we did do a little bit on the vertebra, so there's a few extra structures here. So under vertebra, number 1, you do want to know A, the body, B, spinous process, C, vertebral foramen, transverse process, skip over lamina and pedicle. And then G, we did talk about the discs. For number 2, definitely recognize the cervical vertebra and recognize that they have C, the transverse foramen. Thoracic vertebra, you may want to put a giraffe next to that. And 4, the lumbar vertebra. You want to put a moose next to that. Number 5, the sacrum, 6 coccyx, 7 ribs. And then keep going, 8, and then 9, the hyoid bone. Under the pectoral girdle, number 1, clavicle, 2, scapula, 3, humerus. Then the next column, radius, ulna, carpals. We're just naming them the carpals. Okay, no special name, just carpals in general. And then 4, the metacarpals, and 5, the phalanges. Turn over. Same idea. Number 1, the ilium, 2, ischium, 3, pubis, and that's it there. And then under the last group, E, 1 femur, 2 patella, 3 tibia, 4 fibula. Under tarsals, however, you do want to know A and B, the calcaneus and the talus. So do circle those 2 specific ones. And then 6 and 7 are also things you need to know. Okay, so I just was very, very clear about that. You need to know the bones. Name the bones for next week. That's plenty to do for next week. So I'm going to be quiet now. The next page tells you to lay out your bones. So one of the things you'll definitely be doing as a group, as a table of 4, is laying your entire set of bones out. As you're laying them out, quiz yourself. Name them as best you can. Put them in anatomic position. And then call me over. And let me see if I can find anything that's kind of, oddly rearranged on your body. You've got 4 skeletons in the room. You've got pictures of skeletons in your resources. So you certainly should be referring to those as well as you do this. Okay, so call me over when you get that done, and we'll just keep quizzing yourself over the bones.